Welcome to the Mind Behind Leadership here live on talkradio.nyc. My name is Dobbin, and every Thursday evening we look to talk to diverse and interesting leaders about their experiences, gain insights onto how organisations, big and small, operate, motivate and grow. Now, our guests regularly are dealing with some of the largest companies in the world. For example, last week's guest was Stephen Holgate, SVP of Global Sales at Dale Carnegie, and he was discussing his current work with TikTok and Indeed. And we've had thought leaders like Dr. Tony Alessandra and Mike Macedonio, who are both New York Times best-selling authors. We've had Emmy Award winners like Dr. Sean Duperon and Tyler Pena. All of those are available on the usual podcast platforms, but it also makes me really excited about this week's guest. And I'm looking forward to the next hour because it normally takes 2 or 3 times, but she's already been dancing to the theme tune. So this evening, we've got Tevis Trower. And now Tevis is the founder of Balance Integration and calls herself, get this, we're going to be exploring this, a leadership futurist. Now, she's an author of The Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. And so to get a little bit of a background, 13 plus years at Korn Ferry, IBM, AOL, Coca-Cola, UPS, and in Tevis's own words, that showed her the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly in organizations. She's been a professor at NYU and an Army reservist, which so we need to find out about this. Currently, or has been working over the last few years with Google, Yahoo, Disney, White and Case, AOL, got all these names here as we would expect. But there's some of the interesting stuff. More recently, she managed to get the state of Michigan administrators to stand up and sing to soften the edges before contract negotiations. I really hope there's a video of this. I led 60 CEOs on a leadership intensive in Myanmar, Cambodia and Thailand, interacting with civic, governmental and private sector leaders. She's also been retained for multiple years by the Omega Institute and Kripalu to lead a renowned executive retreat called Success is an Inside Job. I was going to tell you what she does in her spare time, but looking at that, my guess is she doesn't have any. So we're extremely lucky to have Tevis on this evening. Good evening, Tevis.
So good to be here, Graham.
Oh, come on. I need to know. Right, you were dancing already, so we'll come to that later. How do you go from being an Army Reserve to working with game-changing companies? I know the book's Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. So you've written a book. So how do you go from Army Reserve to writing a book and working with some of the most cutting-edge companies in the world, like AOL at the time and Google and Yahoo and IBM, and then getting state administrators to stand and sing?
I think you'd be true to yourself every step of the way is my only real answer.
Well, that's not going to be good enough. We're going to dig in a little bit more than that. So give us a bit of an idea about your background, just about, your journey to this point.
Yeah. So I came from a really humble family and no one was involved in the executive and the leadership and the corporate sphere at all. It was a very humble family, but my parents were the black sheep. And so that meant that they were extremely drawn to culture. We had every type of person through the house, be it creed, religion, you name it. We had a very eclectic kind of social exposure growing up. My parents were kind of hippies. And my dad was a Montessori teacher. And if you've ever studied the Montessori method, it's very much based on 2 things. One is that the human brain is infinitely absorbent. So what you expose it to, it's able to absorb and use. And I think that has been a key observation for me, both in working through the various arenas and venues I've worked in, including the Army, which I'll tell you about, but also this idea that there's a certain collegiality assumed. Like when you look at the structure of a Montessori class, there's an older kid and there's a middle kid and there's a younger kid. And they're grouped in 3 years. And so you're constantly rotating through being the new person, the intermediate, and the knowledge holder, right? And so you're constantly kind of rotating through that. So when I looked at a lot of what I observed, including being a beauty school dropout, including working for the Speaker of the House in Tennessee, including going to the Army because I needed money to pay for school. And I started to really acknowledge what a big role identity plays in leadership, and what a big and formative influence our ability to stand in the strength of who we are, no matter our title, no matter our position. I really turned back to those memories of being in charge of the entire company at Fort Knox, and having to get people where we had to be on time, and having nothing other than my personal presence and gravitas to get people to comply, so that we would be where we had to go and get the things that we had to done. And it's kind of interesting because as I got into corporate America and I looked at how a lot of times it wouldn't matter the title someone had. If they didn't have the respect and if they didn't have the gravitas, it was always a crapshoot if what they needed to get done would get done. And so these lessons have really stood me well.
It's actually interesting. It just, I mean, we're jumping right into this, Tevis.
Yeah.
One of the things you're saying is about having the gravitas, having kind of the respect, having that, you know, we talk about leaders having charisma and all these different things that go into the pot. It's not just about having a badge or some stripes. Yeah, you were in the army.
Yes.
And that was about,
yes,
I guess. So kind of talk to us what the difference you see, or am I mistaken? Is it not just about in the army that you've got, you know, you've got the stripes, therefore you are listened to?
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, you can have the stripes and you can have authority, or title, but if you don't have the respect and the support of the people underneath you, it doesn't matter what your title is. You may be able to force them to do things, but I don't know about you, but the difference between engagement and compliance is a couple of universes, right?
Yeah. I find it quite interesting that this is something we've known for a long time. This is, you know, this isn't new yet. Yeah, lots of companies it is actually new to them. So it's, you know, the consciousness. We talk about conscious leaders. I see that you've done some work down there at the University of San Diego.
Yep.
With that, but it's not unusual. So the U.S. Army, the reason I'm asking is the last 2 years I've run a program, a short program, twice over the last 2 years on emotional intelligence.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I did a course with Peter Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline years ago, probably 15 years ago. And the guy next to me was one of the corporals at the U.S. Army War College. And I was definitely the youngest person there at the time. I wouldn't be now, but I was definitely the youngest person.
Tevis, I absolutely guarantee you, for both our sakes, age is not on the, no questions about age this evening, I promise.
Well, but it was amazing because here he was, and here we were on the tails of one of the desert storms. And what Peter Senge was talking about was level 5 leadership, right? Was the fifth aspect of self-actualization is being core and critical to a competent leader. And I turned to this guy and I said, I was in the Army. How is the Army teaching this? And he said, we need to, because the information is changing so quickly. It's not coming from the top, it's coming from the ground. It can't be socialized quickly enough to respond to. So we have got to be able to cultivate people who can act on it on their own, which is really a scary thing to say when you're talking about the U.S. Army, but it's needed. And I would argue it's needed in all of our organizations. Can we really empower people to act on what they're seeing?
One of the things you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned it a couple of times, was identity in leadership. What did you mean by that? We've got an hour. We've got an hour.
Really? Just have an hour? You're asking me these questions. I think we need a campfire and
that would be the way to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that on the list. I'm going to speak to Sam about that, our producer. Do that for next week.
So whether we look at this stuff from a perspective of Maslow's hierarchy or needs, or whether we look at it from a perspective of how the brain works with respect to fear, right? The way that we keep ourselves safe is through identification. Yep. And that means what tribe, that means what's the language, that means what are the rules of success, that means how do I win, right? And one of the things I realized early on in my career, part of it was being in the Army and watching how when the rules changed, when the Cold War ended and the commissions were cut back and people who had always assumed that they were going to be an officer because everyone in their family had been, when that was what they had built their identity on, when that was ripped out from under them, they were in serious crisis. And these were overachievers in college. These were people who had checked every box, and suddenly they didn't know how to self-identify. Now, any of us who's ever been through that kind of huge shift knows how that feels. Like high performers, more than probably anyone, are fueled by a desire to win according to the rules around us. And even, yes, redefine them as game changers, hopefully. But that identity, I mean, whether you want to get into the Freudian and say, well, it's id and ego and super ego, no matter what, it's how do we belong, and how do we belong with a position of status that confers power and safety to us. And I think that's very true for our leaders and our high performers.
You mentioned safety quite a bit there.
Yeah.
Do you mean say the personal safety for them, or are they looking at teams, or is it?
I think if you're smart, then you're looking at it for the organization that you're associated with, and you're looking at it as a whole. What we see oftentimes is that the worldview of the leader, the ability to imagine identity above and beyond oneself, is oftentimes mitigated, right? Is oftentimes mitigated by the fact that maybe they don't feel safe in their own skin. They don't feel safe in their own identity. And so they're unable to extend that scope of interest, that scope of care beyond the borders of their own skin.
It's interesting because we talk about leaders creating safety within the teams, but what we're talking about now is if they don't feel safe themselves, that's not going to happen.
Exactly.
We're going to go to a break in a moment. When we come back, we want to dig in about this book, The Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. I want to know that. So there's going to be two things I really want to dig into. That, but also what you mentioned. I think you managed to throw in there that you came from slightly unusual background, upbringing. And did I hear you saying that your parents were kind of hippies?
Wow.
Yeah. So we want to know a little bit about how that maybe affects your view on things from when you were younger and right through your career. Has it made a difference? You're listening to The Mind Behind Leadership live here on talkradio.nyc. We are with Tevis Trower, who is the founder of Balance Integration, and we're going to be talking hippies and game changers after the break.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. battles mental illness? Hi, my name is Albert Daba. I'm the host of the show Extra Innings. Extra Innings, I discuss the topics of wellness, mental health, and the experience of surviving multiple suicides within my family. Listen live every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern to Extra Innings for discussions with sports figures, artists, mental health professionals, and many others. That's Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military, and politics, all around what makes a great leader. The personal experiences of what's worked and, maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to the Mind Behind Leadership. We're speaking with Tevis Trower, and we're going to be speaking hippies. Talk to me, Tevis. You mentioned earlier that you've got maybe slightly different upbringing from maybe other people around you. It was very eclectic. You had lots of exposure to people from different cultures, different ideas, different thoughts. How did that? Talk us through that. What was the difference that it made to you? Did you see the world differently from your friends?
I think that what exposure to a variety of people from an early age really teaches you is the difference between worth and self-worth, right? That when we can see excellence in a school teacher, when we can see excellence in a chef, right? When we can see beauty in a person from a different country, when we can taste the amazing flavors of a dish that is nothing like one our grandmother would make, right? When we can really partake of the world and appreciation for all that it has to offer, it allows a little opening for us to say, well, who am I and what do I have to offer? So when our life has not been a homogenous experience, it kind of gives you a little bit of freedom. And I think all of us are being exposed to this now, that our proximity to one another who are different, right? Mm-hmm. It's opening the door for us to say, how am I different? How have I always been a unique individual, that it's not limited to race or gender or age or upbringing, that there's 8 zillion ways that we are unique and specific, and that it informs how we contribute and how we lead. And that's really what I saw growing up, was that the contributions to have a multi-family camping trip happen wouldn't always be made possible by the person that you would assume, right? The person, oh, they do this all the time and they know how to build a fire, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes that contribution would come from the person who thought to bring the harmonica, right? Mm-hmm. So I use these as kind of off the cuff examples, but I think if you look at your own life and I think all of us have examples throughout life that the magic of what unfolds is made by the contributions of everyone. And so I think that having grown up with a viewpoint on that allowed me to move into corporate America and be a little less encumbered by what might have been the expectations. I still felt all the fears and the voices of judgment in my head, but I did have a lot more freedom to stay true to myself while I was climbing the ladder and succeeding. And that made it a lot more enjoyable, I have to admit.
We've got people listening, but this is just a secret between you and I. Okay. I wasn't brought up in New York. Genuinely. I mean,
And
it's
I
a surprise.
you.
It's a surprise to most people. And you know what? One of the big draws about the city was the diversity.
Yeah.
It was just, I knew that you couldn't come in and live in this city without growing.
Yeah.
It's something that happens, which now leads me to think, I'm hearing you saying that, I'm saying, yeah, that's exactly what I've experienced. Come from, a very isolated upbringing, or kind of very narrow viewpoint. Nothing wrong with that, but brought it out. What do you think we miss when we don't have that? When we don't have the exposure to that cultural diversity, and realize that there are people who think differently from us out there. What do you think we miss?
Well, I'm kind of the conviction that we all get exactly the messages that we need along the way. The question is, what are we going to do with them? Mm-hmm. And that's more a statement of faith than science, right? I think that for some of us, because I've spent a lot of times in small towns in the southeast of our country, of my country, the US, in fairly de facto segregated environments. And I think that the question becomes, how do we seek out the differences, right? How do we actually task ourselves with seeking out people who are different, people who think differently, etc.? Because if you think about your brain, it's just a bunch of patterns, right? It's neural patterns that are coded by myelin that then gets recoded and recoded and recoded every time a stimulus strikes it a certain way. And I think that the opportunity for us to take active ownership of the care and feeding of the human brain, I'm going to put it that way. I've never coined it that way before, but for us to take active ownership of that, for the care and feeding of the human brain, really entails, well, wow, my hamster trail is pretty limited. My routines do expose me to people who look like me. My conversations are with the same people each week at the club, or at the this or at the that, or the PTA, right, et cetera. I think that the more that we can expose ourselves to other conversations with people who are nothing like us, the more broad our worldview becomes, obviously, but also our creativity. Because what's embedded in every system of thinking is an approximation of reality. The map is never the territory. And what a system of thinking is it is a map. So the question is, how do we get outside of our own limitations of having bought into whatever map we've bought into, so that we can be bigger and broader and more curious, and therefore more creative and able to respond? And I think that's incumbent upon all of us.
Do you see, I'm just wondering if there's kind of any common theme or traits or common language use when you're working with companies, you see really successful leaders. This is going to be a really leading question. Do you see that they've had that kind of exposure? They've got that openness about them, where they're looking at creativity, they're looking at different cultures, they're looking to that diversity and get as much information in. Does that make us more successful when we're in larger organizations?
Well, I've seen both. I've seen people who do have that and do bring that, and I see people who have not had that, but they have recognized that for them to really be equivalent to the challenges in front of them, they've got to grow. And I think that's a really rare thing, honestly. And it's sad because as much as all of us are reading our LinkedIn and our HBR stories and our heads are nodding about, the compassionate leader, the innovative leader, the collaborative leader, we're all nodding because all of us think that if we hire a chief cultural officer, they're just going to make it go away.
Yeah. And it doesn't, does it?
No,
It doesn't.
they can't make up for the problems we're
Doesn't it?
the leaders are creating.
Do you know what? And what we probably need is people to write books about it, about how they can change the game. Yeah.
Gee, I'll get right on that, Grant.
What a segue. Talk to us about the book. What was behind it? Thought process.
Okay, so I'm a hippie kid who freaks everyone out by joining the Army, right? Who then freaks everyone out even more by going to business school. I learned to speak 3 languages. I work all over the world. I work as a headhunter. So I really get to know that even the highest titled people have profound insecurities about identity, about how viable their careers are, about who they are in the world. And I'm young and I'm watching all of this, right? And I start to realize that somehow the relationship between self and work is broken. And it kind of bugs me because if I look outside and I see a blade of grass, the blade of grass is not fighting being a blade of grass, right? Sugar does not fight being sweet. The wind does not fight blowing. So why is it that we as human beings fight contribution and function? And I think, well, it's kind of weird because we all got to work. We learn how to put ourselves together, right? We have the right language. We know how to respond in a meeting. We've got the resume. We fight for these jobs. And then pretty soon we start bitching about them. Mm-hmm. Well, we just got to be there. And I'm looking around and I'm like, this is funny because as far as I can tell, there are no bullets flying overhead and no one's dying in a ditch. So why are we so unhappy? And I'm working in pretty impressive environments. I'm at Time Warner at the time. And I realized that when I get on the elevator, the C-suite, if someone from the C-suite gets on with me, he or she will stare at the wall or they'll look at their phone. But when the cleaning lady gets on the elevator, she looks me in the eyes and in broken English, because her first language was Polish, she would say, "How was your day?" And I thought, what is it? So this is kind of my first inkling. Well, there were a lot of inklings. I mean, obviously being in the Army, it gave me a lot of inklings. But by the time I'm consulting, I make the leap because I'm really interested. How do we reintegrate self into success, right? How do we create a success that is whole and then has room for us to be a real human being and not just a 2-dimensional set of boxes that we've checked, thinking it's going to somehow add up to happiness. And I'm consulting on culture in several large corporations, and they've asked me to put together a resiliency program for high performers. And I do it and I'm okay. And they're like, but we want you to coach them. And I said, oh, I don't really want to do that. You know, there's so many people who can do that. And they're, no, we want you. And so I sit down and I start to coach these folks. And what I realized is I can ask them what about their day left them unhappy or left them sad or upset them. And they can just rattle things off. And if I ask them what made them happy, a lot of times there would be silence. What gave them joy? There would be silence. And I thought, well, isn't this interesting? We are really intimate with what displeases us, but we are strangers to what gives us joy. And that planted the seed because I became really curious about, there's this the extrinsic trappings of success, right? And we all know what they are. And it varies from person to person. But I thought, well, at some point we lose that internal authority, right? We lose our sovereignty in the face of the world's shoulds. We lose that sovereignty to say, well, I actually exist. And I've got all these skills to navigate these environments. And I'm not going to lose them if I'm in touch with myself. In fact, if I know who I am, I'm going to navigate them even more powerfully. And I'm probably going to be a lot happier, and I'm probably going to be a better leader. So that was really how the seeds of the book started. And conversation upon conversation upon conversation just reinforced that we have got to look at a success that is radical.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we want to carry on this conversation and just kind of dig into that happiness, and also something you mentioned earlier about the voices of judgment. And I kind of wonder where that comes in. Yeah, I do listen to you, Tevis. But what that means to you, but also I'm wondering if there's something in here that's stopping that happiness as well within some of the C-suites, and also what bugs you. We're on the Mind Behind Leadership. We'll be right back after these.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the Nonprofit Sector Connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Wise Content Creates Wealth. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Friday afternoon from 1 p.m. to 2. They say content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. Every episode features tools and tips for content marketing and business people telling the wise content stories of that success. Tune in every Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Do you know what? I didn't start dancing there. Tevis is dancing to the theme tune, and I think, Tevis, the voices of judgment were in my head. What will people think when they see me doing this? We talked about the voices of judgment.
Yeah.
Earlier, and I kind of got an inkling of what we meant by that. Now we're also talking about when we're talking to leaders. And it's not just leaders; it's many people. What's wrong? What we're not happy with. Most people can give us a list.
Yeah.
What do they want to do? What are they? Why would something make them happy? What have they been happy with? Is a much more difficult question. Is there a link here with the voices of judgment? Am I way off the track?
Yeah. Well, so if you think about connection to self as being something that actually fuels freedom of expression, right? Fuels your creativity, etc. Studies show that we are all born incredibly creative. right? We're born experimenting with things. We'll pick up a phone and we'll bang on it and use it as a hammer. And I know that sounds really silly because we're all so sophisticated, but kids naturally are curious and experiment. And we very quickly, by the age of 5, the drop off of that willingness to be curious, to experiment, to try is huge. And by the time you're 18, it's a small percentage that still show this freedom to express. And all of that is due to the voice of judgment. Now, sometimes it's called the critic, sometimes it's called the gremlin, but it's basically the aggregation of voices from a very young age that says that's not good. It's constantly saying good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. And we hear it from our family, we hear it in the media, according to how we want to filter what we see. We hear it from our teachers, we hear it from our social groups, and we're constantly scanning for how do I stay safe? And not only that, but then we start to participate in judging others, right? And really imposing upon other people what our filters have become. And it sounds like, well, but doesn't that keep us from dumping hot water off of a stove? Yeah, it does keep us from dumping hot water off a stove. The question is, when does it become that we are bad, or that we are good, or that we are valid, or that our happiness is valid, or that our ideas are worth expressing, right? And the correlation between kowtowing to those expectations and the voice of judgment and the ability to step outside of that and say, oh, I hear you, but I'm going to share this idea anyway. Or, oh, I hear you that I never stop at a park on the way home because I always drive straight home. But there's something in me that tells me that this might be a pleasant thing to do. These tiny, audacious, absurd actions are what really start to repave a conduit, a relationship between the actioning brain, right, the one that participates in society, and our heart's truth. And that's really what there has to be more room for.
You mentioned earlier, so I'm saying this a lot this evening, about voices of judgment in relation to yourself.
Oh yeah.
So how did you, or how do you overcome those? What kind of tips have you got for us?
Well, I personally don't think they ever go away, right? I think once you create a brain pattern, it's there, right? Mm-hmm. The question is, can you name it as a brain pattern? And can you simply make a choice then, am I going to listen to this, or am I going to do something else? So Graham, you brought up a great example. Are people going to think I look silly if we go back on air and they see me on camera and I'm getting down to my own little theme, right? Like maybe I don't look at it so funny. Moby asked me on a date once and I said, I'm having a party at my house. You should come. And he said, I can't come. And I said, why? And he goes, because there will be dancing. And if there are pictures, I will look silly. People look silly in still pictures dancing. And I thought, you're one of the most powerful recording artists on the planet. You can, this is what I'm saying, right? We all have a voice of judgment that is so afraid of how we're going to look or what other people are going to think about us. But what happens if you hear that voice of judgment and you dance anyway? Truly, I'm asking that question. What happens, Graham?
It's really interesting. Every time you do something where you overcome, for me, that voice of judgment, it's always a great experience. It really is an amazing experience.
It's freeing.
Yeah.
It's completely freeing. Every time I reach for my guitar, the voice of judgment in my head says, oh, you can't really play. Right? But then you hit a chord or you hit a note and your heart goes, oh, that feels good.
And just to get it clear, I asked the questions here. Don't you dare put me in the spotlight, guys. Can I just be clear? Did you just name drop Moby?
Oh.
Did you?
That was not the point, but yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I did.
one of my favorite ever gigs in the UK, seriously.
Oh, really?
And that was one of those that I genuinely didn't want to go. I kind of got dragged along at a festival to see this, and it was one of the most spectacular experiences I have ever had.
No expectations. See,
yes,
go.
absolutely.
When you walk into something with no expectations, it doesn't matter if it's great or bad.
Spectacular. Seen on more than one occasion. Okay, so now we're talking about game changing here. We know how we can get into that mindset. What is your definition of radical success then?
So I started to think about all these. We each have this secret formula that we think, if I just achieve this, if I just achieve that, if I just do that or get this or get that, I'll finally be successful. And all of us know it is insatiable. It is an insatiable beast, right? Because it's a desire to know I finally arrived. And we never arrive. Because what we're longing for can't be satisfied that way. Radical success, in my mind, is where you shift and you say, okay, I still may play the game of achievement, but what's actually going to make me feel as if I'm flourishing is coming from my truth. The word flourish means holding fast to that which you are, being true to that which you are. And you think about a root, right? A root of a plant, it holds into, whether it's craggy soil or sand or whatever. You're from Scotland, so you know craggy soil, right? and it simply holds fast, right? And the more we come from our root, because the word radical comes from radis, right? The Latin that is rooted. The more rooted we are in who we are, then even if we're playing the game of achievement, we're true to who we are. And that strength, the true north knowledge of our own being, of our gravitas, of our values, helps inform our ability to navigate the game of achievement. And so radical success is where we shift and we go, okay, I know all those things exist. And yes, I love my country home, right? Or I love my Tesla, or I love my this or that, or I love that I'm the CEO of blah, blah, blah. But in the middle of all that, you actually feel alive. You know that you exist above and beyond your title, above and beyond going through the hamster trail of your days. You know that you are vibrantly, fully alive, and there is room for you to experience and enjoy that.
We're going to go to a final break, I think it is. This is just flying through. We've got a few things. I want to come back to that kind of, when's that moment that we know, or even if you can give us an indication, what was it like for you when you knew that you tipped over into that point? But they've got a couple of other things, because I know that there is a bit of an announcement with the book as well, so you can tell us about what's just happened with the book. I know it's exciting, and I do want to find out what bugs you.
What bugs you?
What bugs you? Because you said there it bugged you earlier. There was a couple of things with leaders who didn't know what they wanted. What else bugs Tevis? You're listening to Mind Behind Leadership live here on talkradio.nyc. My name's Graham Dobbin. We're speaking with Tevis Trower this evening. We'll be right back after these.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauber, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who will expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
I'm still not dancing. I'm still not doing. I've got too many things to do in the background here, Tevis. Welcome back to the Mind Behind Leadership. We're speaking with Tevis Trower this evening. Tell us about this. I want to pop back in. What's that feeling when we get to radical success? But a Game Changers Guide to Radical Success. What's the news about the book? It's a world exclusive. I'm going to assume it's a world exclusive. And even if it's not, I'm claiming it. Go on.
So excited. So I do not have a publicist. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just having a book. And I got an email out of the blue on Friday saying my book had been included in Forbes' list of 12 top books for compassionate leadership. And I was
nice.
Right up there with Brene Brown and all those guys. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah.
Did that give you a kind of feeling of radical success, or are we talking about something?
No, you know what gives me, I thought about this. It made me happy. I was grateful. I felt gratitude, right? All of those things. But actually, radical success is more like those tiny things that you were talking about, right? Each time that you listen to that nudge inside of you that says, oh, go ahead and say what you really think, or go ahead and dance even though you want to pretend you're too busy, right? Or go ahead and turn down that job because you know it's not a fit, right? Like all those tiny things that we do to align with ourselves, that makes me feel radically successful, because then I'm defining who I am according to what feels right for me. And according to what makes me feel more alive. I mean, isn't that the point? Isn't to live a verb? So shouldn't our living be in support of the sense of liveliness inside of us? And I'm not saying any of this is mutually exclusive of being successful. I'm just saying, why not be a little bit more alive in your success, and not through chemicals or through whatever, right? But how do we make fostering aliveness part of what this whole game is in this lifetime?
You know, I've worked with some of these large companies that you're talking about in a slightly different setting. How do you bring this into corporate America or corporations across the world? How do we get them thinking about, and I'm going to use a term that I don't mean derogatory, to kind of put it in a frame of what's regularly regarded as fluffy? Is it kind of the stuff that is really difficult to measure, and we all know intellectually that it is so important, but because you can't measure it, it gets left?
Well, the funny thing is, I think that a lot of the research organizations, like there was a trust barometer done by Edelman 2 years ago that specifically focused on the C-suite and organizations, and it showed that we want leaders who know who they are transparent, are unscripted, speak from their truth, have failed, right, like, etc. And so I do think there is research out there. I think that the pressure and the fault lines revealed by the pandemic and social crises coming to the surface have really driven all of us to acknowledge that a lot of this common sense heads nodding that we do when we hear about this stuff is actually more mission critical than perhaps anything else. And when I make fun of people reading their Eckhart Tolle or reading their Harvard Business Review because all the cover stories are about this stuff, I'm actually saying, great, but let's go beyond reading, right? Like reading the article and saying, oh yeah, I believe in a human work culture is not going far enough. The head nodding is only the beginning. At that point, you've got to actually ask yourself, how am I part of the problem? And what am I going to endeavor into to try and find my blind spots? Because I guarantee you, if you have accomplished a lot, you also have a lot of blind spots, because we all do.
You know, one of the things, when you look at creativity or innovation models, and you look at what companies use, I always find it fascinating that VUCA is such a large part, but it was brought out by the US Army.
Yeah.
So you've got something there, but when you take it into companies, again, it's one of those acronyms that's thrown around. But when you actually just take that as a frame, and VUCA, for anybody who doesn't know, it talks about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and you know, it was brought out around world politics, effectively. But when we take it into a business world and really consider these, it's almost like a really nice practical framework to get people in. Even though it's old, I mean, it's been around for what, 30 odd years,
yeah.
But it's still that framework to get people thinking about it. And it feels like organizations grab onto that because they've got something to go with.
Well, so one of the footholds, well, there's a couple of footholds that have opened up these conversations for my company to come in. And one is when there's an express pain point culturally that is costing the company money, costing it people, costing it productivity. And generally, we can usually identify that the fish rots from the top. We all know that, right?
Yeah.
So creating new programs and offerings are only as impactful as change at the top is. And that doesn't always mean firing people. A lot of times more people should be fired than are. But
that's controversial, throwing that in there.
There's a lot of room for upskilling and for reskilling, because a lot of times people simply haven't been taught how to be this level of self-aware, right? So there's a lot of opportunity. That's one. The other thing is if they're getting their clock clean creatively or in terms of the ability to attract talent, right? A lot of times they'll bring us in for that. Pain points on the mental health and well-being of the organization. And by that, I don't mean how many people are filing claims. I mean, overall, what is the climate of the organization? And those are really the things. But a lot of times it comes under the moniker of leadership alignment. We all say we believe in this, but what are we doing, right? The ability to innovate and foster risk-taking and collaboration. Okay, let's go for that, but how do you do it, right? And third, the resiliency question, because you cannot be at your best if everyone's a corpse.
Yeah. So what having these conversations then, I know we don't have too much time left, unfortunately. Seems to have really flown in this evening. What bugs you?
What bugs me? Do you know, I think what bugs me is when I see people with lots of talent and lots of ability be told to do something and then punished for it. So when an organization is doing the double speak of saying, we care about this and we want you to help us change it, and they set people at very high levels about making shift happen, and then they do that snap back of the rubber band. They go, oh, not that. And I see the heartbreak, and that's what bothers me. Just as a compassionate professional to professional, I see the lost opportunity, and I see the loss of trust and the loss of faith by the employees, because employees always can smell blood in the water, Like employees can smell it if they're safe or not. And that bugs me when they get a little hope because they feel things are starting to change and then
stopped. So can you almost see what's about to happen?
Oh, always. Yeah. I've got really good spidey sense.
Can you give it, I see we don't have a lot of time, but in 30 seconds, what do you do? When you see that and because my guess is, from the little I know about you, Tevis, you feel that responsibility. What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that you do is you start to ask some really smart questions to the people involved about what's really going on. And then you try to mitigate the impact, the negative impact, so that even if there is a swing back of the pendulum around openness, creativity, team building, collaboration, taking risks, whatever, that it doesn't go quite as far back as it might have. So there's room for hope to continue, right? And you work for it.
Tevis, you've been an absolute star this evening. Thank you. Great dancer and author. The Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success, been named in one of the top 12 books by Forbes for conscious leadership. Congratulations on that. Thank you. I think we're going to have another conversation. I'm looking forward to when you confirm the date that Moby's going to be on the show. Thank you to Sam Leibovitz as well for faultless guidance and producing in the background. We will be back with you again next Thursday evening at 7 o'clock for the Mind Behind Leadership. Have a great week. Good night.